Joshua chapter 11, just a brief little overview. We may have covered it last week, but if we didn't, we're going to touch on it here. It happened that Jabin, the king of Hatzor, heard. He sent to Jobab, the king of Madon, to the king of Shimron, the king of Akshaph, and to the kings that were in the north in the mountains. They all agreed to gather together and bring some armed forces, some warriors. Verse 4 says, many people, as numerous as the sand of the seashore, many horses and chariots. They all gather together and encamped at the waters of Merom to wage war with Israel. Hashem said to Joshua, do not fear them, for tomorrow at this time I will deliver them all as corpses before Israel. You shall hamstring their horses, burn their chariots in fire. Joshua and all the people that were of war with him attacked suddenly at the waters of Merom and fell on them. And I believe the commentary says this is at night. And I believe I've heard an explanation on this. It's just when you strike hard, you strike fast. It's a total surprise, which is what happened here. Hashem delivered them into the hand of Israel, and they struck them and pursued them all the way to the great Sidon. They struck them until there had not left them a remnant. Joshua dealt with them as Hashem had told him. He hamstrung the horses and burned their chariots in fire. I'm not going to get too detailed in the commentary, but if you have a question, just go ahead with it. Joshua turned back at that time, conquered Hatzor, and struck its king with the sword, because Hatzor had formerly been the leader of all those kingdoms. They smote every soul in it, struck them with the edge of the sword, just as Hashem had instructed Moses, the servant of Hashem. As Hashem had commanded Moses, his servant, so Moses commanded Joshua, and so Joshua did. So it's like following the chain of command. He did not omit a thing of all that Hashem had commanded Moses in the land of Goshen. Ooh, wait a minute, I missed something here. And Joshua took this entire land, the mountain. Okay, Leslie's trying to get in. Sorry for the interruption. Took the entire land, the mountain of the entire south, and the entire land of Goshen, and the lowlands of the Arava, Mount Israel, and its lowlands. Unless I'm mistaken, the land of Goshen is on the other side of the Red Sea. Isn't that where they were living in Egypt? So I'm going to have to look into this a little bit. Did this catch anybody's eye previously?
Well, some of this is about the wars of Moses and Joshua, so that when you're reading it all, you're reading also a kaleidoscope of battles that had actually occurred, and you can't get a singular point in here, because when we looked at the all the nations that are listed here, they didn't all die in a very short time. It took years before they finally finished all of the things that were going on. It was not a fast moving event. And we still don't even see the fact that they conquer all the land. They only defeat certain cities as opposed to all of the Canaanites. That makes for a kind of a struggle, because we read Judges and we see the Philistines are there, and we see all of these other Canaanites that are still in the land after it's all said and done.
Yep. Yeah, that was So, uh, he didn't
Hello?
actually.
Hello?
I think
Hello,
we're
everybody?
silent.
Hello?
Hello. Looks like I got a bad internet connection. Hopefully, I won't wink out again.
I winked out before, so I just thought I'd let you know, Ross, that I'm here.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
Sorry.
who's the caller here? Which caller is here?
Caller.
Carla, C-A-R-L-A.
Oh, Carla. Can you identify yourself?
Hello?
Yeah, this Carla Dixie.
Okay, I thought it was you, but I wasn't sure. You know what I mean? It's been a long time since we've had the pleasure of seeing you or hearing you.
Yes, thank you.
How are you doing?
I'm good.
That's good. And your sister?
She's good.
Your sister, Angela?
Yeah, she's doing good.
Okay, just wanted to check in and ask.
Thank
I hope
you.
Ross, you're doing okay, and Steve as well.
Oh, yes. We're fine. Thank you.
Okay, Rod, get better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. That's it for the moment. I won't delay you. I just want to say hi since I'm sort of kind of on time.
Okay. So it appears that died at 110 would have. We don't know exactly when, but we know that 7 years he spent disseminating the territory to the various tribes. And it just may in a matter of months or maybe a year, but he didn't actually start fighting, if that was the case, until he was 103. But then I got to thinking, was he actually 103 when he went into the land? And that doesn't seem right. Sandy, you got something? No? Okay.
No, I just clicked on the wrong button.
Yeah, I've done that quite a bit. Like I said, I'm still working out some of the details. I get sidetracked trying to figure out ages, timelines, and that sort of thing. And again, Steve, you were saying it seemed like only certain individuals were taken out. And on the one hand, the way you read it is that the kings or the leaders, the top two individuals of every single place, were taken out, but not the population, so to speak. But then again, as you're reading, it said struck everyone by the edge of the sword and didn't leave anyone alive. So on the one hand, you've got a complete obliteration, and then on the other hand, you have accounts that give you the impression certain individuals were still alive after all the campaigns had finished. And then what I did notice too are a lot of these kings that are mentioned are in specific cities or locations, small little areas, and not a single one of these individuals that are taken out, so to speak, are identified as either Jebusite, Canaanite, Hivite, Perizzite. It's just it gives a list of kings in some locations, but it really doesn't tie them to the 7 Canaanite nations, not as far as I've been able to determine.
He's going to offer territories to each of the tribes, but during the entire time that they're in the midst of this conquest, they don't capture all the land. They only capture enough for the immediate people to live on. And so there's a war that will come later. Caleb will take up the cause of Judah to clean out the rest of the enemies that are there. And the same thing holds true with each of the others. Some will ignore what's going on and just continue to try to live in that small area that they've already been given and have conquered. But there's no way that they will have ever finished doing what they were supposed to, because as we even read into Judges, we find these characters are still there. And so he's basically, as he talks about a king, he's really talking about a city-state as opposed to a nation of more than a single clan. So it leaves you with the impression that all the land was taken, but in actuality, not all the land actually was obtained during this whole time. It was given to them. Joshua made sure everybody had their section available to them before the war ended. But war is one of those things, like we've gone through Afghanistan. We could be in Afghanistan for hundreds of years because things are just not settled, and the way we fight wars doesn't allow for an ending. And that's the same kind of thing that was going on here. Joshua got tired. If you're 110 years old, how many more battles do you want to go through?
Exactly.
The end. That's kind of what I'm understanding from what I'm reading here, plus Judges and understanding that chapters. So.
Right. Well, as I'm going through here too, while we're in Joshua, excuse me, I read where it comes to the point to where they've drawn lots. Everybody knows where their section of land is. And then it begins to say that, these three tribes gave up 13 cities for the Levites to live in, and then another 6 cities from these tribes. So it kind of gives you this mental impression that they really did settle most of the land, and they have all of these areas, if you will, that they've conquered. And now they're turning around and saying, well, the Levites can live in any one of these 6 or 13 cities or whatever. On the one hand, that's the mental impression that I get, because if they're willing to give up these cities for Levite presence, how is it that you can give it up if you don't actually possess it, own it, or control it? Do you understand the logic?
Can you look at Joshua 13, the first few verses of chapter 13?
Oh my goodness.
Start with the second verse. This is the land that remains. They finished conquering all of these lands that are listed above in chapter 12, but look, these are the lands that still remain.
Right.
Indicating they did not take all the land that was supposedly given to them. They left land. All they apparently did was clear off enough land to house all of their clans, and left the rest of it still occupied. In other words, they did not fulfill God's command to eliminate the enemy that was living there, destroy them.
Right.
Why they find themselves so quickly back into idolatry and all of the other things.
They were making peace and covenants with the residents of the land, which they were told not to do, rather than drive them out or destroy them. I understand that too. So it's really, I guess, a little bit difficult just for the average reader not to understand the art of war, what was actually going on, because the wording gives you one impression, but on the one hand, and then on the other hand, like you said, this is what was still left to go. Nobody ever stepped up to take Joshua's place. The tribe of Gad, I believe, was the one that stepped up and said that we will fight until everybody's got their place, and we won't come home until then. I guess we'll have to keep reading to find out whatever happened with that. There's so much. It's almost as if, on the one hand, 11, it goes on to say how he swooped down, he crushed them verse 12, or chapter 12, rather. These are the kings of the land of the children of Israel smote, and they inherited on the other side of the Jordan. And I noticed that 12, I think, a lot of chapter 11 and then some of 12 have the same language. I'm not going to go back over all of that, but it has some of the same language. It almost reads the same in certain places. That is on the edge of the river Arnon, and there's a city in the middle of the river. That's in both 11 and 12, I believe it is. Never names the city, and I'm trying to figure out how big could a city actually be in the middle of a river, or how big does this river have to be for a city to be in the middle of it? That's an unusual feature. And it talks about the falls of Pisgah. I think that's mentioned 2 or 3 times. Excuse me. And I don't recall reading it anywhere else except here. Again, it reiterates a lot of the same territory: Asheroth, Edrei, Bashan, the Geshurite, the Maacathite. It's almost repetitive in some manners, and I'm not entirely sure why that is. You go on into chapter 12 and you continue reading, and then you get the list.
Ross,
Yes.
before we go on to the 12, let's look at chapter 11, verse 20. It says, "For it was from Hashem to harden the hearts toward battle against Israel in order to destroy them, that they not find favor, so that they would be exterminated." Kind of sounds like history repeating itself again. He hardened the hearts of these people so they would be exterminated, that they would do battle, not make peace. Because it said up in verse 18, there was not a city that made peace with the children of Israel except for the Hivite of Gibeon. So it just caught my eye that that's a phrase we've heard before. He hardened their hearts to bring judgment on them.
I noticed that too, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I did skip over that I didn't intend to. Hardening their hearts, and that was familiar language. And as far as the Gibeonites, that was a deceptive piece. I think we discussed that, didn't we? Yeah. So, and I got to thinking about that a little bit too. It's like, I understand on a modern day level too exactly what was going on there. All of these individuals were putting up a united front. They wanted to seem like they were just completely united and didn't want to give an inch to Israel. And when Gibeon did that, even if it were by dishonest means, the rest of them panicked. Do you understand what I'm saying? Oh, we've got a defector here. Somebody's made peace. Now we are all going to actually have to jump up and go to war. Where it did not seem like they were actually ready to go to war until that happened. At least that's the impression I get from the way I read it. What Gibeon did just aggravated the rest of them. And like I said, we go up further, we go on, and we see that there is the list of the 31 kings. There is a comment as to why it actually said that each one of the ones seems to be superfluous. But it said that they were taking out the king and his right hand man, his magistrate. So And then again, too, here, I find this a little bit interesting, and I'm not sure how they come up with this, but the reason that there were so many kings from is because the land was so prestigious that many kings from outside the country owned cities in the Holy Land, which explains why there were so many kings for such a small country. It also explains why the ruler of only one town should bear the august title of king. All the kings of Canaan took part in the banquet celebrating Isaac's circumcision, and they joined in the mocking of Abraham, saying that surely Abimelech was the true father, since Abraham and Sarah had been married for so many decades without offspring. God responded that the scoffers would be conquered by the millions of Isaac's offspring who would inherit the land God promised. And again, too, I'm looking at the word because it says over and over and over, inherit, inherit, inherit. I've always thought of an inheritance as something that is gifted to you or bequeathed, willed, or whatever. And here this seems to be like you're going to have to fight for every last inch that you occupy. And I'm still dealing with the question or the idea where Hashem says, wherever you set your foot, I will give it to your descendants. So I can almost imagine Abraham pacing back and forth, making sure that he actually covers every inch for his descendants' sake. And then, again, like I said, inherit, but it just seems like anything but an inheritance. Sandy, you have something?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like I'm remembering in other classes that we talked about if it had not been for the spies, the sin of the spies, that when they got to the Canaan, they would have just walked in and taken it. They wouldn't have had to fight. It would have just been handed to them. But now having to fight for it and go into battle was part of the consequences of the sin of the spies. Does anybody else remember that we've talked about that, or am I delusional? Well, don't
No,
answer that last part.
I do recall that. And the other question that comes up in my mind is that the spies that went into the land, only two, Joshua and Caleb, were left alive from that generation. So on the one hand, even though the spies did give the bad report and caused a negative effect, it seems to me that them having died in the wilderness would have been their punishment, because he said, not a single one of you will go, you will die in the wilderness, but your sons will inherit. And it's actually the children of those individuals that are in here actually doing the fighting. So, yes. Did I miss the point, or did I
No,
answer?
it's fine. But you just reminded me of something. If you think about an inheritance today, sometimes it's tied to conditions. You can inherit my property if you do this. You know, sometimes a person will put that in their will. If you will go do this, this, and this, then you will inherit this, this, and this. So
Right.
maybe it's kind of tied to that.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, there really was, the intent was from the beginning. You march 3 days and you go into the land straight up. Didn't say anything about fighting or arguing or just wars or anything. It just, the impression was you march up and you go in. But they took it upon themselves to make the decision well, hey, can we go check the place out first? Can we spy it out, see what we're up against? On the one hand, that's like not trusting God. We want to see what we're getting ourselves into. What? He gave you the land. He said, go in, occupy, take it. And now it's gotten to be all of these wars.
Isn't going back to Numbers and that whole story, my original understanding is that the word that they were using was to survey. They weren't
Right.
going there to spy, they were going there to survey. That's what they were intended to do. What ended up happening was a spy mission. They chose not to interact, they chose not to be seen or understood, but to find themselves being small as like grasshoppers. That they, when they returned home, they were demoralized by what they thought they saw as opposed to what they were supposed to do. And that's how often we find ourselves being overwhelmed by what we see and not what we're supposed to be doing. Small chunks, here a little, there a little. When they come into the land with Joshua, they have the same problem. Chapter 13, the first 7 verses talk about the fact of all the territory they don't conquer. And when it's all said and done, they got the lands on the east side of the River Jordan. Those 3 tribes had their territories, but they had them before they even marched into the land. Then you find that the territories that they're talking about are basically the Judah, Benjamin area. That still left all the other 7 tribes with only partial clearing of the land. They didn't own all that they were supposed to. So it comes down to the fact that, yes, they fought for 7 years, but there's a lot of time in that 7 years where they don't do any fighting. They only march around for a while and then they settle. Because you remember back in those days, campaigns had to be, well, they could only be fought in good weather. And you didn't fight when you were supposed to be plowing your fields or planting, and you didn't fight when it was cold and rainy and all of the other things. So there was a limited time for war. And in that limitation of war, those 7 years really amounted to probably a year and a half. And they
Right.
never really truly conquered all the land that God told them to conquer.
Right. I had considered that too, because if you figure the travel time to wherever you're going to have a campaign, you've got to mobilize the army, make sure you've got the supplies to do it. You have to try and estimate that you're going to wrap it up, because if you are obligated to appear 3 times in a year before the temple, well, you've got to get out there, do what you got to do, turn around and get back and make sure that you've passed the period of time for purification, because if you've been out fighting wars and dead bodies, who knows? There's just so many details. Go ahead.
No, just a question about just the logistics of this. Typically, you think today when soldiers go into war, they leave their families and their children back home. But they've got their families and children with them. How were they fighting battles? Where were the women, the children, all the cattle and the herds and all that? They've got all that they're dealing with. So where are they? Well, they're going off fighting a battle.
Did you ever play Risk? Risk is a war game in which you take your armies and you march through different countries, and every country you march through, you have to leave people behind. And so that's the concept that happened. Gad, Manasseh, and Reuben, they left their family behind on the east side of the Jordan, and they sent their soldiers to the west side. They conquered the Judah territory. They left their families in the Judah area, but their soldiers continued to march. So they were constantly dropping off people, and some of those families probably stayed with or in areas that had already been secured, but they constantly left men and positions and everything behind. And so as they're marching, they're probably going to have to rely on taking the food sources just like the Union soldiers against the Confederates in the Civil War. You take an area and you take the grain and you take everything that's there and continue to march on. But as you do, your army gets smaller. It doesn't grow in size, it shrinks because you're leaving troops behind in order to defend what you've already taken. So it's kind of a, like I said, the 7-Year War wasn't a 7-year war. It was much, much less than that. Because the battles, first off, if you carry your instruments into battle, how long can you swing a sword before your arms get tired? How long can you throw a spear? Or how all of those things limits the physical body. They had close quarter combat, but at the same point in time, they still had problems maintaining the energy necessary in order to go to war. You just have to take the battle and then you have to sit down and you rest. And so there's a lot of rest time in there. So the 7 years is just not 7 years, and the families are dropping off and somebody's got to stay behind to protect them. So the army continues to shrink. And so it appears as though Joshua made sure every land, each tribe had their own section within their area, but their responsibility was going to be, you got to conquer that whole area. You can't, we aren't going to do that for you. And that's when they were supposed to trust in God to help them do that. But so many of them were pacifists. The tribe of Dan was a pacifistic tribe. They basically they lived on a very small sets of land. And again, their land was in the midst of the Philistines. So you got the stories of Samson. There's lots of stories that come out of here, but all of them tell us that there was not all the fighting that we would have assumed in our sanctified imaginations that was going on.
Yeah. That's kind of what I mean, because of the way it reads. He took this, he took this, he took this. In my mind, and I'm sure a lot of the readers, it's like he was just marching along and just one right after another. Every place fell. And you just kind of get this mental impression that it was just like a tank rolling over, just one right after the other, which is not literally the case. Andy, if you got something, go ahead. No? Okay. But that's kind of the impression that I get, this king, this king, this king, just line them up and take them down. And Steve, like what you're saying too, if everybody is moving along, say that you come to Dan and you secure a particular city or a space. Well, the first thing you want to do is, okay, you've taken the grain and the cattle, so Dan now puts his stuff in. He sets up shop, the women and the children and the cattle. Perhaps there's a certain number of males that stay back to defend the place. And then now you've got a smaller group of people moving to the next destination. I would assume that that's how it might have happened. It could have been a situation that whatever, maybe you've got 10 tribes of women, children, and cattle staying at a location until the next location is secured. Then if you go from Dan to Issachar, say, okay, we've secured a place for Issachar, so they move on. Perhaps it was something like that. We just don't have enough detail. There's not enough information on the logistics.
We have the historic pattern. Go to the Southwest in the United States during the days when the United States was conquering Indian tribes.
Right.
Indians were living in small groups and clusters all over. It was not a situation other than the Little Bighorn where we find 5 tribes of Indians gathering together for one battle. And again, it was one battle. It was not a war as we understand it, because after they defeated Custer, they spread out. They moved away again. The tribes did not hold together. I think the same thing is really holding true here. Dan was the smallest tribe. All they needed was enough land to support them. That's all they were looking for. The Philistines controlled the rest of it. Also, as you're getting further on into war, one of the things that you run out of is metal. You don't have the metal that you need in order to make the weapons and the instruments that you need. The Jewish men did not have the trade of blacksmith. That they got from the Philistines. The Philistines basically kept the iron to themselves. They were the ones who supplied the instruments of war. All of it goes back to Cain and what's his name? Noah and his brother-in-law. Can't even think of his name. But anyway, Noah's brother-in-law, who was
Tubal-Cain?
Tubal-Cain. Thank you very much. Tubal-Cain. Tubal-Cain made war instruments. Noah made farm implements. Two entirely different processes. And the uses of the materials were for a different purpose. The Philistines were a warlike nation. They had city-states. They had armies. They had natural. These people are farmers and agrarians and herding cattle and sheep. They were not built for war.
Right.
I got to go when I'm talking too much, but I got to go when I was in Israel to the Valley of Elah, where David fought. And one of the things that I learned while I was there talking with the different people was the fact that there wasn't a lot of implements for war. David had to Saul was willing to give David his armaments because there were not enough armaments. He was going to give him what he needed. And then David says, well, I don't need that. That's not how I fight anyway. And he took his stones in his pouch and away he went. And he used the implements of the enemy. As the war went on down there, the Philistines had all of the implements. The Israelites only had the rakes and the shovels and all of the things that they needed in order to farm. And so it was a very uneven battle to begin with. It was not it's not how John Wayne would have fought, I can tell you that.
That's true. No, what you're saying, I've completely run across some of this information while I'm reading, and there was a time after they had come into the land and they began to settle, and we're moving up to the time of Deborah the prophetess. It's clear. They're saying if you need a hoe sharpened or a rake or something to that effect, you go to the Philistines. They're the ones that have the metal. They can sharpen it. They can forge it. They can do whatever. So they were essentially at the mercy of the Philistines when it came to implements of war. And speaking of the time of Deborah, now that we're on the subject, after the war with Sisera, she goes and in her song, chapter 5, the Song of Deborah, she makes a remark that there are 10,000 soldiers, but not enough swords and shields for any of them. And that's exactly what you're describing in the time of Saul. He's got a multitude of soldiers, but not any of them have shields, swords, or any means of weaponry, if you will, which comes right up into the time of David, and we know about his slingshot. Excuse me, I have to. So the more, I guess, the expansive that I'm reading, the time of Deborah, the prophetess, Solomon, Saul, it really takes all of that to kind of get the bigger picture of what's actually going on. And like you said, these folks have come out of the wilderness. They really don't have much in the way of traditional weapons, if you will. What they might have had, they carried through the desert in 40 years. And how good is that? Especially if you've never used it. So, and they're really not even in a position to do any farming because they were just, I guess, the modern day equivalent of a Bedouin. You pitch your tent, you take care of your livestock, You garner whatever food you can, and then when it's time to move on, you just pack up and go, which is about what they were doing in the wilderness. Now, they were given the manna, so to speak. They really didn't have to work for their food. They didn't have to farm for it. They didn't have to even barter or buy it. We're under the impression that the manna was there every day. So in some respects, and I don't mean to be demeaning in any way, it's like you get up, you go get breakfast, and what are we doing today? Are we packing up and moving, or are we, you don't have to sew your clothes, you don't have to fix your shoes. None of that wore out the whole time they were there. So essentially, if they weren't studying, there really wasn't much else to do once the tabernacle was complete. I mean, there was about, 6 months maybe it took them to make it, or at least that's the impression we get. Anyway, I digress, and now I talk too much. Sandy, you got something? Or no?
The first standing army was David's army. He was the one who organized an actual army and implemented the structure for war. He created all of the commanding organizations that went out. He established all that because remember, he's the one who's going to conquer all the lands that would naturally belong to Israel in the world to come, or in the days to come. And so he's actually the one who creates it. Saul has an army composed of Benjamites, those people that were his. That was his clan, and that's all the farther he really went. And volunteers, because Dog the Edomite becomes a part of that whole thing. But Saul did not have an army, and again, it was just the collections that they did. In the book of Judges, when it talks about the tribe of Benjamin fighting off the other 12 tribes. Well, that was a gathering. It was not an army that was there. They gathered them all there. So the concept of war in those days was far different than what we have a mental picture of. And I think it's important to understand these people were not intending, they were not militaristic. There was no blitzkrieg. There was none of that. They were just basic farmers and herders, and that's what they were. And they created for themselves a force to go forward, but it was not anything special. Remember, Joshua in the Battle of Ai first sent out 12,000. How did he choose the 12,000? He took 1,000 from each of the tribes. They had to select their volunteers. Those were the ones who went to war in that first battle. It was not until they got defeated that he understood, I'm supposed to bring everybody with me. And so he has that whole process that goes on. I'm understanding also that in those days, according to the Midrash, Phineas, the fellow who stabbed the Simeon in Cosby, he was the warrior priest in those days. They had what they called a warrior priest. They had a high priest and a warrior priest. And he was the warrior priest because when they go to battle, they sent out the religious community, but not all of it. They sent out the priest, and he led the other 12 tribes. So
True. And he was, yeah, you're right, the one with the spear. You had said something else that triggered a thought a moment ago. Oh, rules of war, rules of engagement, if you will. And it was almost a gentlemanly type affair. The two forces would line up face to face, opposing one another. And in the case of David and Goliath, Stephanie, okay, you have a good one. Thank you. He's good. The case of David and Goliath, I've always read it, and that David shows up at the scene of where this Philistine confrontation is going on, and from the reading, it's like you've got the two camps sitting in opposition to one another, face to face. And there's one guy out here, Goliath. He's got a sword and a shield. Come on, who's going to take me on? Which one of you guys wants to be, the unlucky whatever? Of course, David steps up with his slingshot and takes him out, which makes perfect sense because none of the Israelites had swords, shields, helmets, or anything like that to begin with. So what are you supposed to fight them with? But what I'm trying to say, it was a gentlemanly type affair where a challenger would step forward one-on-one. It was not like the Philistines surrounded them and just made mincemeat, because they had the means to do so. They could have very well done it.
If you go to the Valley of Elah, where the battle took place, you'll find that there's this large hill on what appears to be the south side of the valley. And as you're going across this plain, then you reach this what looks like a ditch as much as anything else. That's where the Israelis were. They were in this ditch area. The Philistines, the foot soldiers were all on the hills across that. So when you were at night, when they lit up their bonfires, it must have been an awe-inspiring sight. But behind that hill is where the chariots, they had 5,000 chariots. They could have easily run over the Israelites, except the fact that they were afraid of them. And so the only one who was willing, what they did was they sent out a challenger, the biggest guy we got with the heaviest equipment, and sent him out there to challenge, because they really weren't interested. They were interested in defeating the Israelites, but the Israelites themselves had such a reputation with God that they were afraid. So they sent out Goliath, who had no fear of God because he didn't know God, and they sent him out into the valley. And David, what is the first thing he says? Well, God's on our side, so what are you afraid of? And so you have these two sides, one with no weapons, one with all kinds of weapons, but they're afraid to go to battle. So they sent their best soldier out there to fight the other best soldier, and winner take all. Because if he would have lost, the understanding was that they would have basically owned Israel. But it wasn't such a way that they were actually. It's amazing. You can't believe the site itself. I mean, it is so vast, yet the valley where they're actually fighting is very small.
Right.
All the soldiers would never have fit into the valley. They couldn't have run their chariots in there. They were just it was just too small an area for them to do that. So it was a matter of one soldier versus one soldier. That was the, gunfight at the OK Corral. That's what it amounted to.
Yeah, that's true. I've seen an aerial view and some videos of that particular area, and don't know how much different it actually looks today, but they've been able to identify it. They know for a fact that that's where it actually took place. I was amazed to see that. But what you just said had not really occurred to me until just now, that, they've come through the Red Sea, they've taken Jericho, and it really wasn't much of a fight. They didn't really want to because of the fear of God. They moved on, and then it was Og in Bashan and so on. So they're, on the one hand, we get the impression that Joshua was just slaying them left and right. But again, where did he get the weapons, so to speak? And they really didn't have this, but and that explains too why the kings were just not really ready to just jump up and go attacking the Israelites, because it really had to have been a situation where there was the fear of God, and that's why they weren't interested in going out and trying to slay as many of these Israelites as they. Because it seems to me that it would have been an easy matter to do. 5, 6, 10 kings get together, which is exactly what happened here in this one chapter. They all gather together. They come to this one location, a stream. They've got their chariots ready to go. I would presume that if you've got chariots, you've either got spears or bows and arrows to go along with it, because possibly. But they were well ready, organized, and had planned it out that they were actually going to do this. So apparently, somewhere, somebody decided that they weren't going to be afraid of God anymore. And they convinced enough other people that we've got to do something. Because with all this many successes, somebody somewhere just said, we can't just sit back and let them kill us, because they're doing it systematically, just one right after the other. I'm going to have to look at it more, because it's really difficult to understand the mentality of either side, not ever having to been in their shoes.
If you go back again, strategically, remember, Moses conquered everything on the east side of the river. And in doing so, he slew Og, he slew Sihon, all of those characters over on the east side. So he had developed the reputation of thoroughly eliminating the enemy. They come across, they go up and they do their thing at Aval and Gezrim, and everybody gets to see the size of their numbers, the number of people that were there. When you look at 1 million people marching up and down, you get the idea that it's a pretty terrifying sight. They come back to Jericho. What's the first thing that happens? They surround the city. They walk around and the walls flat. So you can imagine the rumor mill from what's going on. From there, they go to Ai, as the story says. They lose the first day, come back and eliminate everybody on the second day. Now you've got 4 different places where there's total elimination of life. Now your question is, what's your reputation? And the reputation of Israel was that they were a bloodthirsty lot who could conquer and kill everybody if they wanted to. So people would gather together in groups as they moved towards them. They didn't run out and everybody gathered together and let's go down and beat them up while they're at Ai. They waited till they got to where they were at, and then they organized and they grabbed the kings, city-state kings from a particular area, and they tried to defend their city. Those were the ones that were destroyed. But the rest of them that did not come up, the Philistines didn't come up. They maintained their land. It was only the areas where they needed land for a specific group, for a tribe to settle, and they only settled what they needed. And that's when they ran into problems, because they never finished the job that God had assigned to them. And Joshua, at his age, just got tired.
Yeah,
I understand
definitely.
that.
Well, in some of the places back where you're referring to Moses and how they had defeated all these various places, it said that the Israelites went in and took them out by the edge of the sword. Well, the only place, or the only way that could have happened, was after they had defeated that population at that location, they would have taken their weapons. And then they moved to the next, whether it's Og, Sihon, whatever, more confiscation of weapons. So that really would have been the only way they could have armed themselves, being as mobile as they were. Like you said, they didn't smelt, they didn't work metals, they didn't really have a settlement to where they could actually pull off this kind of feat.
Did they bring any weapons out of Egypt?
I don't know.
I didn't hear. What?
Did they bring any weapons when they left Egypt? Did they plunder the weapons from Egypt?
The only weapons they brought from Egypt were the ones that they got from those Egyptians who drowned in the Red Sea. That was their weapon source. And so as they began to move from there, Those were the weapons that they would have used in the beginning. Again, they didn't. If you go back and look at the tabernacle, what elements in the tabernacle were metal? What metal were they working with? Gold and silver, very, very flimsy materials that you would not use to make a weapon with. And there was no iron in the city or in the tabernacle. So the metals, the bronze again is, well, it's better than tin, but I mean, the concept is it breaks and it's no longer any good. You have to constantly smelt more or create more. Flint was the other element that they would have used. That would have been the original rocks that they would have been using. But again, they were using those for circumcision. They were not using them with the intention of making weapons of war. So all of the mental picture of war has to change because of the conditions that they found themselves in. That's why God was the one that was going to have to cause the defeat of the enemy, because they physically did not have the materials. They may have the bodies, but they didn't have the materials to use. It just wasn't something that they were capable of doing. It just was short. That's the way it worked.
And now that you brought that up, there had to have been some knowledge of smelting and metalworking, because there was the copper snake that was made. Of course, the implements for the tabernacle, like you said, gold, silver, copper, soft metals, malleable. As a matter of fact, I don't know how many people actually know it or not, but you can take a sheet of metal and actually beat it with a hammer so thin that you can see through it. You can literally see through a sheet of gold. Real, nothing but metal gold. I was blown away the first time I understood that. But then again, that's how you do, I think, what they call metal leaf or gold leaf. You really can get it down so thin that you can manipulate it into just about any shape you want. All right. Well, we're coming up on the top of the hour. We've talked about everything just about, Joshua and plenty more. I would love to have stuck more to it and got further along, but I think really what we've said contributes to a better understanding of what's going on with Joshua. Like I said, it takes so much information, peripheral information, that just really, unless you have that, it makes it difficult to understand exactly what it is you're reading. Like I said, if you just read 31 Kings, boom, 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 you get the mental impression. Well, shoot, yeah, you just jump in a tank and run them over. At least I've managed to have that train of thought. Any last final thoughts, Carla? You haven't said anything, Leslie? Nobody. All right. Next week we'll pick it up again, and give me a thumbs up. Do we want to actually go through 13? Do we want to start at 14? Do we want to? No? Don't know?
Don't care.
Well, we'll try to go and start at 14, because like you said, 13 recounts a lot of what's already been written previously, I think in 12. So we'll make a note to pick up and start at 14. And hopefully maybe somebody will have some questions a little bit more. I'll definitely have notes, and the commentary is here. We can just look down and look at the commentary as we go. So apparently the commentary answered a lot of questions that we might have had. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, Ross.
Oh, you're most welcome. And I hope Rod his voice gets better before mine goes away. Y'all be good. We'll see you next week. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Parsha. Hiya, Sarah. Steve said he won't be able to be there, but I will do my best. I absolutely have to be there. Thank you, Sandy. Carla, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hi, Carla.
Hi.